Então, muito boa tarde. Vamos dar início a mais uma sessão deste grupo de trabalho da PASC, Democracia, Cidadania e Inclusão Social, que é coordenado pelo Rui Martins, vice-presidente da direção da PASC, bem como pelo Carlos Magalhães. A PASC tem apostado muito nos grupos de trabalho, temos 3 grupos de trabalho ativos, que estão a funcionar em pleno desde a nossa tomada de posse, que se realizou precisamente há um ano, dia 18 de março de 2023. Para além deste grupo de trabalho, há o grupo de transição climática e energética, mar e território, e o grupo de trabalho lusofonia e relações internacionais. Temos promovido sessões praticamente em todas as semanas, sessões online. Esta hoje foge um pouco ao figurino, será também online, mas será, como está a ser visível, presencial, portanto será uma sessão híbrida, e será conduzida pelo Rui Martins, que está no próprio espaço, na Livraria Martins, em Lisboa. Hoje o tema é Democracia e Direitos Humanos. O Rui Martins convidou 3 pessoas, 3 mulheres, da Rússia, do Irão e do Afeganistão. Sejam muito bem-vindas, muito obrigado por terem aceito o nosso convite e passo então a palavra ao Rui Martins, que irá conduzir os trabalhos.
Well, to something that was difficult to speak in English in an understandable way, because most of us speak English and Portuguese, and not Portuguese, so let's start. This is, as Renato told, the 8th debate about for this group. The theme for today is democracy and human rights, and três perspectivas femininas, perspectives of I will try to do this part in Portuguese, okay? Just for recording. Depois do optimismo exagerado pela Primavera Árabe e pelas democratizações do Leste da década de 90, vemos agora aquilo que eu sinto como ser um momento de pessimismo idêntico aos anos 30, 40 e 90 do século XX. Ou seja, as autocracias are rising up, the populism are mining inside parts of the democracies of the West, and so the current status is not brilliant, at least for my perspective. Maybe I'm too pessimistic by nature, but I'm not optimistic. And what happened recently with the suppression, apparent suppression of the revolution in Iran, the degradation of situation, human rights in Afghanistan, and the recent death of Navalny and that murder, and that apparatus, that apparent democracy election in Russia that's still running, or finished yesterday.
Yesterday the show was over.
Yes, the show is over, exactly. So what I want to understand is what are the current situation of these rights of democracy in your countries, if you're optimistic about the future or not, and of course, perhaps maybe what can we do in Portugal as a NATO member, as a European Union member, what can you do to help or your request? I will try also, that part I won't try to tell, I will speak in English because it's a small video. Ksenia Ashrafullina é empreendedora, ativista e poliglota russa e portuguesa. Nasceu na Rússia e estudou em diplomacia e relações internacionais em Moscou, no intercâmbio na Complutense de Madrid. Em vez de assinar o contrato com o Ministério dos Negócios Estrangeiros da Rússia, escolheu fazer um mestrado em Economia e Desenvolvimento na University College London e na Universidade Carolina de Praga. Há 12 anos que mora em Portugal, onde fundou Lisboa Possível, um movimento cívico que tem a vontade de suave. E cortou uma boa para Costumo comentar o que se passa na Rússia do ponto de vista da oposição, da imprensa, rádio e televisão. Lida Bonakdar é dramaturga, ativista artística e investigadora do Irão. Vive em Lisboa desde 2014. Depois da Covid. Fez doutoramento em estudos de teatro e performance na Universidade de Lisboa, com foco de investigação na resistência não violenta, protesto e movimentos feministas. Mahdiya Erfani, licenciada pela Universidade Americana do Afeganistão, com uma licenciatura em Ciência Política e Administração Pública, com foco em paz e justiça transitória, e uma especialização em Direito Internacional. Estuda Medicina, estudou Medicina no Afeganistão e agora continua a sua formação na Faculdade de Medicina da Católica. Cofundou o Afghan Cares, uma organização com o objetivo de ajudar os afegãos durante as crises. Onde recentemente lançámos o programa de empoderamento das mulheres focado na saúde, na educação para a saúde. Desde 2021 vive em Lisboa, onde foi evacuada a partir de Mazar-e e nas questões de colapso do governo da República Afegã. Feita a introdução, I will ask you to speak freely about the matters that you want. After your speak, you will reply some questions that the people present will ask. You can start. Thank you. Who wants to start? Maybe Ksenia after Padma?
Sure. I think you asked us about whether we have any optimism left. Maybe that's a good start. Going to frame the discussion. So, weirdly enough, the optimism is still there. So, in Russia, Alexei Navalny, exactly 1 month and 2 days, was murdered by Putin. And he did personify the hope for a different future. And he coined this phrase, the fantastic Russia of the future. FRF, we can say it this way because he will always use this abbreviation because it has become just the thing that we believe that should happen. And I now feel that he has sacrificed his life in order to somehow make us all feel that part of the burden and blame has been taken away, and then the only thing we have left is to act. It's might be a weird concept to explain, but a lot of Russians live with this huge weight of responsibility. There's a lot of push for collective responsibility coming from pretty much every side, obviously from Ukraine for all the reasons, but also from the rest of the world. So being a Russian in a position is pretty much being stoned from every possible direction, and especially from within. A lot of people at the beginning of the war decided that they didn't even want to speak the language. So this state of collective depression is something that we've been all feeling. And in a strange way, the death of Navalny has given us the chance to say, okay, we've had our martyr, we've seen the worst death. We have been trying to change this, and now it means that we all have to step in. And I think this is what I see happening in the people I know. And just so that you don't think it's my imaginary friend speaking in my head. Well, this very Sunday we had the elections, and let's be clear, no one thought that it would have any impact on the outcome. Everyone knew this was a farce, but okay, the whole approach is use every opportunity to hack the system and also to get people to create horizontal connections, because this is the beginning of a civil society, which Russia has lacked all this time, because you don't have trust. If you always think that someone is an FSB agent, people don't really work together. So what I saw on Sunday is that a lot of people, especially in Russia, and I can talk about my own friends and relatives in Russia, they participated in this action for the very first time in their lives, because I mean it was safe. You can hack the system, like, oh, here I'm just voting, and then you go and do whatever you want, but then you all of a sudden become a subject of a political process. So of course we are all under a threat of being eliminated by some FSB guys, and we don't know who is next, because their modus operandi is making it random, because you have to have that randomized approach to eliminating your enemies, because then everyone feels they're the next threat. But at the same time, I do feel that all of a sudden I saw thousands of people doing something together and connecting, and this is new. It's new for many people. That's why I would say that what Navalny has done, and it's specifically Navalny's work, I contrast that position, it's really Navalny's genius, was to get people to believe that they can be better than they are today. They can leave the apathy, the learned apathy, and start acting. And this is the legacy. And this is the legacy that this generation and other generations are carrying, and that's what we are trying to do, and pass that on to other people. And I think also, just to finish this off, I think the fear of fear is something that a lot of people have overcome, because it's a completely different level of, different scale of dealing with fear. At some point, when you see how you can get detained, you go through. I didn't go through it, by the way, but others have, so they know much about this. But we all somehow said, okay, we can talk about this. We should continue doing this. And his team, they're continuously 24/7 saying what without any roundabouts, who is to blame, who are the corrupt ones, and they have taught this entire generation and everyone who's around us to overcome or to deal with this fear. And that's why I think I have some hope. Of course, you can say, oh yes, but the Ukrainians could, topple their own regime back in the days and had, they had the two important revolutionary moments. Well, Russia is different in the sense that, the Russian autocracy and now totalitarianism can nuke its own people inside. And so the risks and the level of severity has always been at a completely different scale. So what I see happening, despite all of this, there is hope. So this is maybe my optimistic view of what I see happening.
But when it comes to Afghanistan, it's a little bit more complicated, because it's not only a struggle right now, it's a struggle that was put through like centuries ago, to decades ago. And whatever we are witnessing in Afghanistan has to do with the peace talks, and has to do with the peace negotiations that was going on in Doha. And also even in the beginning of the Republic government, after the 9/11 and the invasion of the United States in Afghanistan, the Bonn Conference, all of these factors together, 10 years of republicanism, Islamic republicanism, and then the failure of peace talks, and then now. But the common theme that I'm seeing here right now is that our colleague talked about the fact that the recent incidents in Russia brought a new perspective and a new phenomena of maybe not very unfamiliar, but not very practical. The fact that people are coming together and are talking and are raising their voice against all the things that they are not agreed with. And she also talked about the fear. And I think these are the two things that are happening in all the three contexts, especially in Afghanistan again, because we can see the fact that the civil society has become more active in a real way, not in a symbolic way. Is happening right now in Afghanistan, with the women coming to the streets, having demonstrations in an environment full of violence, full of aggressiveness, and the fact that the Taliban are mistreating women while demonstration. So the woman in the first rule of the Taliban wouldn't have done this. However, it's like we can say like the Taliban in their first rule are the same Taliban that we are seeing right now, but the women of right now aren't the one that were in the first rule of the Taliban. Now they can raise their voices. Now they can stand up and stand against the fear, against the injustices, against the apartheid. And the other thing that we talked is about the fear. Fear is right now dominating Afghanistan. People do not accept the government. It's not a government that is based on election. There is no rule of law. There's no constitution. So how people are managing their lives, and the people are living in fear, but because of these two factors and the fact that the Taliban are not sitting back from their very extremist ideas and ideology, I don't think there's any positive positivity when it comes to the future perspective of the Taliban. I'm not optimistic about what's happening in Afghanistan, but maybe with some new resolutions, with some with the involvement of the international community and addressing the very root issues in Afghanistan, the very indigenous issues that we are dealing for centuries and for decades. Maybe through those there can be some positive, some hope. But right now, I don't have a positive, and I'm not optimistic about the democracy in the next.
Thank you. I would say thank you what you've been saying. That there are two issues I'm interested to talk about. Firstly, about being optimistic and pessimistic. Actually, I don't see it as a binary way, or either this one or that one. I think it's kind of what it is now. In my opinion, we have to emphasize more on the power of the powerless who are indeed powerful. But according to the history or the fear that, which is very real, the torture is real, the execution, at least in Iran, as far as I know, as we see in Russia, it is a real fear. But you don't have to live with that fear and do nothing, but we do still have the threats out there. So in the first step, I think we as citizens have to figure out that indeed we have the power to deconstruct the hegemony which is going on, and we have the power to shift the paradigm. But it happens via protesting and nonviolent resistance, which is, I think it's a sustainable way. And the other thing I wanted to talk about was about two among the many threats to democracy, which one of them is the death of the middle class, which is right now happening in Iran. That makes it harder to achieve democracy in the coming years, even after Islamic Republic, is whether it's there or not. And the other one is the trust of the people in the state and in the government, which it's very hard to rebuild this trust again, which are at least two of the pillars of the democracy, I think.
Okay, I do have some questions. In first place, I must say that the war is also here. I think it was not popped up yet at the news, but three sides of three Portuguese parties were taken down today. Partido Socialista, PSD, and Chega. I don't know exactly who did this. It seems to be a denial of service attack, but the war is here. Also, in March, there was a surge of attacks coming from botnets from Russia that take down several sites in Portugal. It was not on the news. Also, it is recorded now. So if no one knows, it is public now. Anyway, so the war is here. We are on the extreme side of Europe. We are too far from Iran, too far from Afghanistan, not so far from Russia, but it is here also because the internet is everywhere. Ksenia, I think that the collective depression is something of the Russian anima, but also Portuguese thing. I don't know exactly why, but the fatalism and the messianism, the searching for something that will save us, a guy, normally the Czar. In Portugal, we also have that kind of anathema, like Don Sebastian, that will return someday, the missing king. So, what I want to ask you is, what failed in the decade of 19th? Because in the 19th, it seems to be that there was a chance to have democracy in Russia. What failed? And another question that was related to you. In the war of Afghanistan, Russia lost around, I don't know the exact number, but around 13,000 men. Now they have lost around 400,000. It's 10 times more. I don't understand how the Russian society can handle this kind of casualties without having some kind of internal dilemma and turmoil. And then I will after ask something to Mahdiya and Lida.
Okay, so starting with this kind of mythology about a savior, it's a good myth, but I think the reality is that people are not necessarily fatalistic. However, they have been trained by history to be unhappy. And this was also very well said by Navalny that Russia should not just be free, but also happy. And there is this level of internal repression that is inexplicable. So whenever you ask yourself, whenever I read history, why would you even do this? Why would you torture your own people? And why would anyone decide to procreate under such conditions? The direct questions to my parents and to the people I see them. Why did you even think that this was a good idea to have kids? If you know that you can't leave easily, if you're unhappy with your life, but somehow nature takes over and people still procreate. Although Russia, population-wise, at this time is 140 million now, much fewer people live there compared to Bangladesh, for instance, it has a few millions more. So maybe I am wrong in thinking that people decide to procreate once they don't, but they understand that it's just pointless. So maybe there is this fatalism, a very practical fatalism, not a mythical fatalism. Just okay, people don't have the conditions to think that it's a good idea. As for mythology, maybe we can even compare Navalny's story, the arch of the story, to the classical story that you can also see in the Bible. This guy who leaves everyone, then everyone thinks he's dead, and then he resurrects. I mean, when this happened to Navalny, it was exactly the same pattern. But this is not about being. I'm not inviting you to become, mystical in any way. I think this is just a story that it repeats itself. It's a pattern. It happens to people, and you never know the exact details of what that resurrection really means. But then in his case, was surviving the Novichok. But then that the hero still could not overcome the evil, and this is the story that we have today. But still, I think the people kind of look at that story and they remember his resurrection and the teachings. So there is a metaphor that we can do about how a single person can mobilize so many people to believe in themselves, because he had a few characteristics of he was personally religious, but the entire movement, it has Jews, it has Muslims, it has everything inside. So they are religious. They're as a group, as a team. But what he does share with religion maybe is this belief in other people, that guys, you are actually great. You just don't realize how great you are. You can do that, and this is his legacy. So maybe this is slightly different from the story that the Portuguese tell themselves, because again, this is maybe a very superficial thinking that I'm exposing here, but the Portuguese that calls some superstitionismo is that someone will still come. For us, like, okay, no one will come, now it's you. Go do something. And this was the entire premise. Go do. It's not a sin, or it's not a bad thing if you have done something small. It's horrible if you haven't done anything. That's the message. The Bible is very good at formulating this very clear statement. Now, about the sheer numbers of deaths, Russian society is just this hotpot. This is usually an expression used in the United States. Russia is a hotpot of so many ethnicities, of so many different mentalities, and unfortunately, if we could simplify thinking, speaking from the sociological point of view, there's this very dynamic, independent Russians who, entrepreneurial, deal with their own fear, and they represent this ability to move and change. And also there is this other Russia that just expects something to happen to them, and they maybe it's the result of the history where those people were serfs, and then you never actually had real experience of democracy. So there's absolutely nothing to base your democratic ideals on. And these are the people who just accept their fate. Okay, can't do anything about it. My son or my husband gets sent to war, and they don't oppose to this. So I don't know if this serves as any explanation to the sheer violence of it. But then you see that the active ones, the young guys, they were all out the next day when the war started and when mobilization started. So there are two Russias continuously struggling. So I would even say that maybe this explains by this latent civil war of values and of ideas for who we are. But there are many who we are. There's a Chechen who we are, there's a Dagestani who we are, there's a Tatar who we are. There are just myriads of them, and it's actually, there's no such thing as a nation state. There's no such thing as Russian. In English, there's such thing as a Russian. In Portuguese, there's such thing as a Russian. In Russian, there's no such thing as a Russian. Because Russian means specifically an ethnic Russian, and I mean, I'm just half ethnic Russian, and everyone else is something. It's a mix, it's a puzzle, and this puzzle makes it hard to have a single nationalistic idea. And when they try to put you into this nationalistic idea, things explode. And maybe to finish off, it's the absence of any idea of Russianness that people have. It's kind of this day, it's kind of like a non-identity state where you don't know what to hope for, and then you accept the death.
Okay, Mahdiya, why the negotiations, peace negotiations, it failed? Why do you think that they failed? There are, if I understand correctly, you said that there were manifestations, demonstrations at the streets now in Afghanistan. But this information is not popping up in the West, I must say. Can you say more about this? And how are the Afghanistan current leaders chosen? It is not a democratic process. How do you choose the guy that is in the top of the regime today?
Yes. So regarding the peace talks, why it failed? So I think for answering that question, I have to go back to 2009. After the 9/11, when the United States invaded Afghanistan, we say invaded right now, because under the Republic government, we will say that, because basically the United States came to Afghanistan as a part of the UN mission for bringing peace and to basically rescue Afghan women from the brown men and stuff like that. But then after the collapse of the governments, the invasion of Afghanistan became a topic. So after that, there was this one conference, and the problem started from there because the Taliban wanted to be a part of the conference, but then the doors were shut at their face, and the talk and the negotiation over a new government, interim government, was between only the United States and the Afghan, and even the warlords, the elite part of Afghanistan. So after that, the interim government got shaped, and then in order to establish relationship with the local, to bring stability for a very centralized Afghanistan, they had to use the people who had influence on the people, like the warlords, the leaders of the tribe leaders. That's why they were like, let's turn these. There's a period that they had to turn these warlords into businessmen, so that again, for the sake of their trades, they can have peace and do not go for violence. And so that was the instance that the Taliban couldn't be part of the process. And then after that, in the years 2008, there was a understanding that we cannot continue this war, especially if this understanding was coming from the United States, because they've been investing a lot of resources, a lot of military, but they were failing. So the idea came up, let's open up the way for Taliban to come, and this process became more practical under the Ashraf president, when they established a peace commission for the Taliban who wants to join the government. And that was the time that in 2016, Gulbuddin Hikmatyar, who was known as a terrorist, would join the government in a very hasty and surprising process way. So after that, under the Donald Trump administration, so in 2008, there were some attempts to really bring the Taliban into the negotiation, and it was initiated by the Americans. And in Doha, Taliban and the Americans, they signed an agreement without the presence of the Afghan government. And the agreement was mainly based on the Taliban to promise that they will not let Afghanistan to go back to become a safe haven for terrorists. And apart from that, they should respect the human rights and women's rights. These were the two, and also for Afghanistan to be able to have trade to be economically flourish. But these were the main tenets of that agreement, plus that the insecurity doesn't affect America, of course. And this was the moments that the Afghan government didn't have any part. We can say this was one of the reasons that the negotiation failed. It was not fruitful. Apart from that, so after that there were a lot of attempts for the Afghan government to talk directly with the Taliban themselves, because Americans had their problem solved. And that time, Afghan government had to send the delegation to Doha, and Taliban did also. But the delegation were comprised of only men, not only, only the elite, and with fewer youth, and with fewer women. And the presence of the women was also very symbolic. They were, I can say that in order to bring peace in the society after decades of war, for the process of reconciliation, who should be involved in the peace talks? The people who have suffered the war, the victims, the people who were directly involved in this war, who have lost their loved ones, have lost their important things in life. But it was not the case. So I can see the absence of a real public opinion. That's why when this process was going on, me and my friends in college, we have colleagues, we started to have a survey that what is the public opinion regarding the peace process in Afghanistan. And we came up with this survey, with this article, Peace on Horizon, an examination of public opinion on peace talks. And we found interesting information, because we found out that not all the people in Afghanistan were optimistic about the peace. At least half of them were very critical about it. The minorities were very kind of like scared of the process that was going on, because they knew with the Taliban even joining the government, or even with the Taliban taking complete power, there will be the situation of the minorities will become very important. So we having the answers like the Hazaras for the ethnic minority, and I belong to the ethnicity, and the Tajiks were the people who were like less optimistic about this process and about the present joining of the Taliban to the government, because Talibans are mostly Pashtun, like 99%. So I can see these two reasons: the absence of a real representation of delegation of the Afghanistan and Afghan people, as I said, the public opinion was absent, as it was in the constitutional meeting, as it was, and also the fact that the United States acted very rapidly without giving the Afghan government a good representation of power in that. And also the withdrawal of the United States gave the Taliban the upper hand in the conflict zone. They quickly seized over a lot of provinces, and because they were mostly influencing the rural areas, because the war during the 20 years of the Republic government was active in the rural areas. So the people who were living in the villages, they were tired of the conflict between the Taliban and the Afghan government and NATO, with like foreign army. So they were the people who were showing consent to the Taliban. And the Taliban started from the villages, and then with the withdrawal of the United States, with the withdrawal of the foreign armies, they started to progress more and more. And then that we saw that I can say that even the peace talks didn't end, that the government collapsed. However, we could see the deadlocks in the regarding the other question, how the Taliban are empowering. So this is also a little bit the democracy too. For a democracy, what are the principles? What are the measurements? Is the government elected? How are they elected? Are the elections fair? Do we have national legislative representatives elected? Or how are the government policies are being met? Can we have can people come together, make political parties and stand against and make opposition against the government? I can say, I don't know, from the autonomy of the people, the media, the freedom of choice and speech. And if we see all of these factors when it comes to democracy, Afghanistan has none. We scored 8 out of 100 when it comes to the measurement of democracy in Afghanistan based on the Freedom House organization. We're like 8 out of 100. And that means that, yeah, of course, starting from the beginning. After the collapse of the government, for the first 6 months, they declared an interim government, but with the main leader being Mullah Hibatullah Akhundzada, who was also a major figure in the fight in the 20 years of fight between the Taliban and the National and Foreign Army, who is now the leader of this regime. And after Hibatullah Akhundzada, who is mostly living in Kandahar, but is like releasing decrees from there to Kabul. Apart from that, we have this we have this council. We have this Supreme Council, which is consisted of religious clerics. And most of them are the people who were active in the war. So now they are being appointed by the Mullah Hibatullah Akhundzada, the high positions in the government, the ministries, the commissions. So Mullah. So based on the Taliban's interpretation, Mullah Akhundzada is now the supreme leader of Afghanistan, which we call him as Khalifa. Like the way they used to rule the Islam in like 1400 years ago. They believe in that. And they have established Sharia law. And they say that all the prosecutions, all the legal framework should be based on the Sharia law, which according to them, which for them it's a more extremist interpretation of the Islam. And so there's a kind of like opaqueness, like there's no transparency in how they are functioning, in how they are ordering, in how they are prosecuting people, according to which law. The Constitution of 2024 is suspended. When they took the government, they said that we are kind of adhere to the Constitution of 1963 that was established, that was drafted by the King Zahir Shah, because they think that Constitution of 1963 has more of a Sharia law in it than the Constitution of 2004. They say that the Constitution of 2004 is a rather Western produced kind of constitution and is against the Sharia laws, which is not the case. And Constitution 2004 is one of the best in its kind. And I mean, when it comes to its sources, especially. And I think this can give a general idea of how the government works. And I don't know if I could answer that.
This is okay. I do have some questions from Renato, but I will ask first something to read, and then I will open to the people on the room if they want to ask something. Well, middle class is theoretically essential to create a stable democracy. And there was a middle class very flourishing in Iran some years ago. it is possible to develop a democracy, a stable democracy in Iran without middle class? That's a question. Also, there seems to be a generations gap in Iran between the older people that supports the government and the not so older people that supports opposition. I want to ask if it is true or if I am wrong. And this question is basically for both of you all, because we in Portugal, we are not used to this notion of a state not corresponding to a nation, because we are one of the rarest countries in the world, in Europe certainly, where there is a language, but there is an exception, Miranês, and of course, ocupação da. Qual é que é o senso que ocupado com os espanhóis? Ao universo. What I want to ask is it possible to create a stable democracy in countries where so many people are so different? For example, Russia is two different countries. St. Petersburg and Moscow are completely different from the rest. And by the way, most of the people fighting in Ukraine are not from Russia, from Moscow or St. Petersburg. So they are from the inner states. And the question is, how do you make compatible plurinational states to a democracy, to a stable democracy? It's for you.
First class about the middle class. I think it was Islamic Republic's strategy to just destroy the middle class, because middle class are the ones usually who do the protests, who are just gathering together and want to form a democracy. But this middle class is not migrating, like the graduate from the university and the elites. So there are two classes in Iran, which still there are a little part of the middle class, but they are very rich ones who are connected with the government and the state. They're getting richer and consume all the sources of the country, and the classes which are not aware of what is happening. But am I positive about it, or am I don't know, optimist about building a democracy in some day? Yes, but it takes ages. For example, many people in the opposition, inside the opposition, and in the diaspora, are still looking for a savior, especially a male figure. For Iran, it's the king, for example. That this thing prevents them from coalition and made the opposition to stand against the Islamic Republic, because they want someone to come and save them. And I think it's not something that is only happening in Iran. This rise of the far-right parties in many countries is showing kind of the same pattern, same mentality, which is of the patriarchy. I associate it with that. But yes, it is possible. It takes time. It's a responsibility of the elites to talk about it, educate people, and the people themselves, the people who, especially women, who their body has been weaponized for over 40 years in Iran. Now it's the time that this weapon backfire and be present in the public sphere, go out in the street, talk out loud. It has some fears, of course, it's dangerous, of course, but that is living. And you talked about, I don't know if I answered it or not, and you talked about the difference between the generations. They are different. It's not like that the older generation doesn't want change. They do want, for example, according to Iran, I'm saying that I'm saying it over and over again, that very old women put their scarf and hijab away just during this women life freedom movement. And that was really surprising to me. They are doing it after, I don't know, they're 70 years old, 80 years old, and they said that enough is enough. If this is the power of a regime who are consuming their people I don't want it anymore. But their way of resistance is different. For example, the resistance and the strategies, the tactics Gen Z is using is completely different than the millennial. For example, Gen Z don't suggest something, they do something. That is what was happening in Occupy Wall Street, for example. Their way of resistance is completely different, and I think that is more sustainable at the same time. It's the same thing in Iran as well. The way they do things is completely different. The way they stand in front of the police is different. I remember there was one of the guards of the Evin prison told that we are exhausted and tired of these Gen Z in the prison because they're doing different. They were not like the similar previous prisoners.
I have two questions from Renato Epifani, was on the Zoom. First, for Ksenia, which is the current feeling of the Russians, of the middle Russian, if there is such a thing, about the war in Ukraine? They are pro, they are against, they don't care. And for Mahdiya, is it really possible to change the regime without a foreign interference? And for you, which is the major paradigm of the opposition? Most of the people defend the return of the Shah, of the new Shah, of another kind of regime, because I do follow some groups on the internet, and there seems to be not agreeance. Seems people who hate more between themselves than the regime. You want to start?
So I think there have been quite a few questions already. So you did ask me about the 90s, which I did not respond to. Very quickly. There were no democratic institutions that the Soviet Union left the Russians with. There was no understanding of how the economy works, how the market economy works. So this allowed for the oligarchy to appear. The people who knew how these basic mechanisms worked, they pretty much gained control of the entire economy. And this is how they managed to get into their hands all the oil and gas resources and plus the rest of the middle table. And they become the super mega rich, and then that they started deciding who gets into power. And so the democratic institutions did not have time to develop just because the money was dictating how the institutions should work. And then Putin comes in 99 and then usurps the entire thing, and then little by little starts taking away all the rights, and then it escalates into this totalitarian regime that we have now. As for the middle class, yes, the middle class is why Navalny managed to get his message across. The spillover from oil and gas industry created the service class, the big four type of people working in consultancies. And they had enough money to actually have mental space to think about other things other than survival. I mean, they already had their washing machines and all the basic needs catered for. And so these people started having that extra time to go and volunteer and to think politically. And this only happened in early 2010s with 2011-12 with elections in the Bolotnaya. And so it took 20 years of that weird, with the 90s and the fat 2000s. And they said, oh, by the way, we have vote. Now maybe we can vote Putin out. And they couldn't, because then by then he had already usurped all the economy and managed to get all the oligarchs under his belt. As for what the Russians think about the war in Ukraine, I mean, there might be some weird fans of blood and war, but no such thing as, oh, let's go and have war. This is not how people think. It's probably something very similar to what the Portuguese had in their last war, although it was different. It was not on the national territory. Although in Russia, it's also not, it's slightly on the Russian territory, but it's kind of not really, it's somewhere else. So one reaction is this collective depression of the people leaving. Then the reality of, I can talk about the friends I have, who and where did not return from the war. So, for instance, my mom is a teacher, and so friends are teachers, and they know the kids that they taught that, oh, they haven't come back. So that is circulating. People are aware of that. You can't hide this. Now, you saw the guy one day, and it's no longer there. So of course this creates, what's this for? But I think there is also this magical thinking that comes from the TV, from the main propaganda channels, that somehow there's no blood and we're just in this national defense mode. So it separates the blood and dirt, the reality of war, from nebulous ideas about how the country is great. So this is propaganda's work, just kind of not show the real atrocities. And most people, it's just the psychological reaction is just to pretend that nothing is happening and just go in, plant seeds, or whatever people do to distract themselves. It's just a protective reaction that Russians, a lot of Russians are having. But to say that somehow people are trying to get more people into war, no, we're seeing the exodus of all these young guys. I've never seen so many young males, or males my age, around me on Sunday. Wow. Russia has a huge disproportion because males have been systematically eliminated as part of the population through repressions, through wars. I mean, the entire 20th century is like, if there's at least 10 million gap, there's an entire Portugal missing in terms of men, men. So all of a sudden they're all here, and probably we'll see a lot of this now with the next waves of mobilization. And just things you see yourself, to look at these guys leaving and say that somehow they want to go to war. No, the ones who go are the ones who have no other chances. They have no IT, they don't have education, they don't have qualifications, they don't know that they can. So pretty much the poorest from the remote ends of Russia who are hopeless.
Mahdi, do you remember the question?
Yeah, I think so. So I actually answered the first. That is the problem. The media really affects the narrative. What is important right now when it comes to Afghanistan is the demonstration of the women that are happening on a daily basis. They have the courage. They are well prepared. They don't want to use the achievements that they had in the last 20 years. Even with the dress code that the Taliban have imposed, they are coming out and they are shouting. And this is not this is such a thing that the Western aren't showing these struggles, aren't showing these efforts from the women's side, from the real people of Afghanistan. And even before, like during the Republic government, Afghan women were shown in a very different form. For example, if you have seen like news from Afghanistan, you would most probably say these women who are under these blue burqas, which needs to be saved. That was the narrative that the Western media used to show to the people here in this part of the world. And media is being influenced by the political intentions, and that is a reality. Apart from the second question was like, when democracy come back?
Without foreign aid, if it is possible to flourish inside. The question is it possible to have democracy in Afghanistan without any international interference? Or is it a foreign body?
Yes. I mean, we couldn't have a sustainable democracy even with the presence of 20 years of presence of the foreigners and efforts in Afghanistan. What was the problem? We first of all should see that. What happened in that 20 years? We should analyze that. We should see what were the pitfalls, and then again, the same method, the same approach is good to bring Afghanistan back to a democratic, to bring it back basically to life. But I say this most of the times. Afghanistan, it is right that we need one. We need the foreigners to influence Afghanistan, especially when we have the Taliban being under sanction, and they most of the times use the famine to draw the hunger of the people to ask for more and to ask the international community to eliminate the sanctions. So now we have these means, at least the sanctions are a means for putting pressure on the Taliban. And but this is not enough. Taliban have used these methods in a different way, by not letting women, by eliminating women from society. They're like, the more you put us in sanction, the more we're gonna eliminate women from the social spheres. This has been their approach. But apart from all of this, all the Afghans know, and all the people who have been to Afghanistan, they know that the problems in Afghanistan are very rooted in very, very Afghani thing, in very indigenous problems that we had for at least in the last 3 centuries. I can say the social divisions. Afghanistan is made up of different ethnicities, with some of them even with different religious backgrounds. We have Sunnis, the majority, and Shias, the minority. We have Pashtun, the main ones. Pashtun, Tajik, Hazara, Uzbek. These are the main 4 ethnicities in Afghanistan. And we have been in war with each other, at least for the last 40 years. Why? Some say that with the Russian invasion in Afghanistan, this inter-ethnical conflict started. So we cannot say that this basically eliminates the option of having foreigners inside, because this option was one of the reasons that Afghanistan came into the power. The fact that the Communist Party was not compatible with the traditions that we had, and the fact that the influence of the USSR in Afghanistan started the fall of led to fall of the communists, and then the civil war, and then the Taliban, and then the Republic government. So the social division. Apart from that, Afghanistan is in a very geopolitical, has a very geopolitical, important geopolitical position. Even regardless of we being united or not, a lot of foreigner traders are coming to Afghanistan because the instability in Afghanistan are in their favors. One big example is Pakistan. Pakistan enjoys in many aspects the instability in Afghanistan. They can endure the waves of refugees and migration to there. They prefer that, but they don't prefer a peaceful, a stable Afghanistan.
They're bombarding Afghanistan, right?
And they are in the eastern border. So these are a lot of political, social issues are in place. Yes, the presence of international governments can be fruitful in Afghanistan if their approach is contextualized in Afghanistan. If the approach is contextualized, I repeat. We had the presence of the international community for 20 years, but the approach was peace building, peacemaking, nation building in a post-conflict context like Afghanistan. But all of these approaches were very westernized, like they were coming from Western. They weren't all aligned with our values, with Afghans' values in Afghanistan. To be honest, not all the Afghans agree with all the principles of democracy. We really don't count on individualism. We don't do that. We are the people who we have our own little jergas, our own little how can I say? Councils in villages who solve people's problems, and most of the times people rely on that more than the judicial bodies of the central government, and that was the case because of many things, because of the corruption, because the government is very centralized. because of the time-consuming processes and poor public services. So you see, Afghanistan has a totally different kind of context. We cannot approach to Afghanistan or even to Iraq or even to Iran with a universal template that we have that has worked in some parts of the world. So yeah.
We all understand around 20. What about the divisions between the opposition in Iran? What do you think?
I think there are different ideas. Sometimes you can stand against each other, but I think that is very normal in all countries and even in many oppositions around the world, which they are different. They need to solve this inside themselves. It doesn't matter which one I feel closer to, but there are people who like talking. They are people who want to decide afterward. They are people who are more closer to left-wing ideas or right-wing, and they are different. And it takes time for them to get closer, in my perspective, and it's about maturing of a revolution. Each revolution needs to get matured, especially in a society like Iran that for half of a decade doesn't have any political parties, NGOs, and so it takes time. But there is one thing which is critical, and I wanted to talk about it here. It's about the Western behavior toward what is happening inside Iran. And by Western, I mean, firstly, Western governments who are acting and behaving with double standards. In one hand, they are negotiating. In the other hand, they are behaving like they are against the government's totalitarian, sexually apartheid, theocratic regime. But they keep on negotiating with them. I understand that there are a percentage of people who looks like they are in the opposition, but they are part of a reformist party in Iran who are talking in Western countries, like they try to manipulate. But I think that Westerners are smart enough to differentiate them. And as the vote is a current currency in West, the opinion of the people is becoming pretty much important for the people in Iran and to stand against the Islamic Republic, because we as Iranians doesn't want Western countries to come and just push them away and make the people free. There is no such a fantasy. No one has such a fantasy. We just want them to stop negotiating with them and support the people inside Iran, because the situation of Islamic Republic actually in the Middle East doesn't do any good for anyone around the world.
For example. Do you want to make some questions?
Yes. First of all, migration and cooperation involve human, yet in your countries, but other tyrannies that give to us a great courage to fight. And here it seems that the people sometimes and the women show to the world great courage. The question, it's about what all of us can do better for civil society, political society, states, for support something that is linked to all of us. Tyranny, it's united. Now we have Russian tyranny, we have Iranian tyranny, we have China's tyranny, we have all of this, and inside our democracies, we have any linkage worked year for year. I trained as a fixation. Trend is very dangerous for all of us. Endless wars, no more endless wars, create very great problems in Afghanistan, in Syria, and so on, and Russia also. So I would like to know your point of view that you yet share to us, but in synthesis, how you can join together any actions to support the problem of women, of men in tyranny, in Russia, in Afghanistan, in Iran, in other countries, and say to you that we in Europe like all of this, Sharia, it's Inquisition, Portugal, and Spain, and so on. You have a problem of fascism very deeply inside our society, because it's hidden, but it's at show off. So we are all together, and what we can do for help these trends to a better world and a freedom of movement in this world.
Perhaps anyone wants to ask something else, because we're trying to post it. Maybe we don't miss call.
Sorry, then, because we keep on forgetting what we're answering.
Yes, that's true also. Better perspectives.
I can quickly respond. I think there are two things. First, stop being so dependent, all of us back here in the West, on oil and gas. I mean, even Portugal. If all Portuguese decided not to drive their car just once a week, millions would be saved. And these are the billions that would not go to Putin. Putin is full of money, and he's still filling his coffers with all the money that's coming from the EU and from the United States, from the rest of the world, buying oil and gas. And this requires us here understanding that we can't pretend that we can continue our comfortable lives and not have war somehow magically if we keep on doing the same thing. I mean, the definition of madness is doing the same thing and thinking we can get different results. So Portugal and Europe need to, and I think this applies to Iran as well, it is the same thing. If all of a sudden we can move differently and stop using oil and gas, if we can heat our houses differently, if we can, fuel our industry differently, then Putin will become irrelevant, and Iranian dictators will become irrelevant. And the second thing is protect every attempt at nibbling at your own democracy here. I'm actually going through this process where we were denied the right to manifest. And, of course, my first reaction was like, whoa, red flag, alarm. But a lot of you was like, oh, you just don't understand. The police can do whatever they want. Who are you to tell us, the Portuguese, although I do have the Portuguese nationality, how to behave? And then I was like, whoa, I'm trying to defend your own right. Someone is trying to limit, if there's a very small violation of any fundamental rights, you should scream and you should manifest and you should get organized for this to never happen. But I think there is, of course, complacency in every society. It's just a human nature, something the Portuguese somehow special. That, things are fine, we have the 25th of April, boom, democracy, it will be there forever. No, democracy is fragile, and there are very few states that enjoy, and very few people globally that enjoy democracy. It's the result of historical luck as well, of course, trying and luck, that we have this. And in Portugal, just whenever you see an injustice, make sure that you get other people organized around it, that you get everyone involved, because we need to have these connections in between us, the horizontal connections, so that the civil society doesn't think that, the politicians will do it, we've done our thing, we've voted. No, connections every day is a process. Every day we need to defend it. And I think this is what you can do yourself a favor and do the world a favor by being a democracy independently.
Can I add something? That and other things that more than the curse of the web, that ask your parties, ask your government what you want, because you have the superpower of your vote. And that is not because of us only, that is because of the madness in the government is really viral. It's a virus that if it is happening in Iran, if it's happening in Russia, if it started to happen in the US, it will happen everywhere.
Do you have something else to ask? Oh, sorry.
It's, I would say is to transmit this idea, these values to the new generation, because maybe they are not fully aware of what they have right now. And as my colleague said, democracy is fragile, so probably maybe in the future the democracy will be the endangered. So the transmission of these values and the importance of this is also very important. And yeah, there are a lot of factors that can help with it. The media that's being censored, and the checks and balance in the government if it's as tightly as possible. So,
finish just a second. I won't take it back. So in Iran, we see in the 70s the focus of the young people partying and especially women on like dresses, and we see that and comparing ourselves in culture because at about the same time we were transition from the dictatorship to democracy, and we look back and yeah, that country was way more advanced than we were at the time. But in an instance, everything collapsed. I'm not sure if that's 100% correct, but that's the way we see it from outside, looking back to Iran. And that's something that we should be afraid of. But my question is, what do you see right now in the Western, in Portugal and other European countries, that you can identify as a red flag to what happened at that time, not only in Iran, but also in Russia? Because when we see on TV Russian people speaking in Russia, there is a clear rift between what Russians in Russia say about the current state of affairs, the government, what they want for the country, and probably for us, we think something like they don't exactly enjoy the state of affairs right now, but they are content, for lack of a better word. They don't seek a change as much as we think about being effective. So I know that many things that we see are disinformation, and obviously there is a filter between what people really think and what people are willing to speak out on front of the camera. But for us, it's strange to see that dualism in terms of people inside and outside the country. And for the Afghanistan, we had something like 15 years without the Taliban in power, unless you count on the most remote regions. We lose those 15 years education, especially for the younger generations, or do you believe that the seed of information and the seed of trying to learn more to bring yourself that remain there and it was working?
Isso might be
the legacy of the Islamic Republic is recognizing women's bodies. Actually, that is the big difference. Which is visible, but there are invisible danger with Western communities as well. For example, the right for abortion, the right to LGBTQ rights. You know, these little by little accumulate each other, and suddenly you wake up and you see the big difference outside.
Maybe for Russia, I think it's really the framing. It's the narrative. We're doing everything to change that narrative, but people come like, oh, you don't do anything. Like, oh, since 2010 we protest, there are thousands of people outside, but this was not on the news. I remember when Navalny flew back from Berlin when he was after surviving the shock. This was not on the news. We had to protest. It wasn't the first page. For us, even here in Portugal, to get Navalny on the first page of any newspaper was completely impossible. No one wanted the narrative. The comfortable narrative was Russians are passive, they all love Putin, let's buy gas and oil. And for 10 years, guys, open your eyes. And only when he got imprisoned, only when then he got famous for all the wrong reasons, then they started inviting us to talk about the Russian opposition and what actually is happening. So unless the media projects the story that we are constructing, there will be no story, there will be no alternative narrative. So we're kind of out of breath trying to show how many we are and how we are resisting. But somehow the solidified narrative is that we're not. And so it's changing now. Biggest changing now, where we were showing that we were doing something. But again, decades of one narrative versus the subdued opposition trying to say over here. And now it's even harder for us because in Portugal, yes, they do give us the microphone and we are on TV. But in Spain, no. In other countries, there is no way for the Russians to speak up because there's also a lot of pressure from Ukrainians who just say, don't show any Russians. So again, democracy should work here. So, okay, let's not dehumanize the Russians. They are our allies. And Yulia Navalny also said that don't dehumanize it. We need to act together.
Just to finish, please.
Yes.
1 minute.
No, we haven't lost it. The fact that I'm here and I'm talking shows that the 20 years of education is not reset. The fact that the women who raise their voices against oppression, considering detentions and harassment and violence, shows that no, education has done its work. Education is prevailed, and I think this can be a turning point.
Just to pause. Last remark. So thank you for being here. Sorry about Gary to close, but my daughter also works in the bookstore and she also lives at 20, so I know what you are feeling.
Well, thank you.
Okay, and just closing the record. Renato, vou fechar.
Certo.